Bible in a Day. Message version. August 18. Esther, chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 3, verse 15. This is the story of something that happened in the time of Xerxes, the Xerxes who ruled from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces in all. King Xerxes ruled from his royal throne in the palace complex of Susa. In the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all of his officials and ministers. The military brass of Persia and Media were also there, along with the princes and governors of the provinces. For 6 months he put on exhibit the huge wealth of his empire and its stunningly beautiful royal splendors. At the conclusion of the exhibit, the king threw a week-long party for everyone living in the Susa, the capital, important and unimportant alike. The party was in the garden courtyard of the king's summer house. The courtyard was elaborately decorated with white and blue cotton curtains tied with linen and purple cords to silver rings on marble columns. Silver and gold couches were arranged on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and colored stones. Drinks were served in gold chalices, each chalice one of a kind. The royal wine flowed freely, a generous king. The guests could drink as much as they'd like, king's orders, with waiters at their elbows to refill the drinks. Meanwhile, Queen Vashti was throwing a separate party for women inside King Xerxes' royal palace. On the 7th day of the party, the king, high on wine, ordered the 7 eunuchs who were his personal servants, Mehuman, Bizthar, Arbaiah, Bigtha, Abika, Zethar, and Zarzak, to bring him Queen Vashti, resplendent in her royal crown. He wanted to show off her beauty to the guests and officials. She was extremely good-looking. But Queen Vashti refused to come, refused the summons delivered by the eunuchs. The king lost his temper. Seething with anger over her insolence, the king called in his counselors, all experts in legal matters. It was the king's practice to consult his expert advisors. Those closest to him were Karshina, Shethar, Admeth, Tarshish, Meres, Marsina, and Memucanan, the 7 highest-ranking princes of Persia and Media, the inner circle with access to the king's ear. He asked them what legal recourse they had against Queen Vashti for not obeying King Xerxes' summons delivered by the eunuchs. Memucan spoke up in the council of the king and princes. It's not only Queen Vashti has insulted. It's all of us, leaders and people alike, in every last one of King Xerxes' provinces. The word's going to get out. Did you hear the latest about Queen Vashti? King Xerxes ordered her to be brought before him, and she wouldn't do it. When the women hear about it, they'll start treating their husbands with contempt. The day the wives of the Persian and Mede officials get wind of the queen's brazenness, they'll be out of control. Is that what we want? A country of angry women who don't know their place? So, if the king agrees, let him pronounce a royal ruling and have it recorded in the law of the Persian and Medes so that it cannot be revoked, that Vashti is permanently banned from King Xerxes' presence, and then let the king give her royal position to a woman who knows her place. When the king's ruling becomes public knowledge throughout the kingdom, extensive as it is, every woman, regardless of her social position, will show proper respect to her husband. The king and the princes liked this. The king did what Mamerkin proposed. He sent bulletins to every part of the kingdom, to each province in its own script, to each people in their own language. Every man is master of his own house. Whatever he says goes. Later, when King Xerxes' anger had cooled and he was having second thoughts about what Vashti had done and what he had ordered against her, the king's young attendant stepped in and got the ball rolling. Let's begin a search for beautiful young virgins for the king. Let the king appoint officials in every province of his kingdom to bring every beautiful young virgin to the palace complex of Susa and to the harem run by Hagari. Haggai, the king's eunuch who oversees women, will put them through their beauty treatments. Then let the girl who best pleases the king be made queen in place of Vashti. The king liked this advice and took it. Now there was a Jew who lived in the palace complex in Susa. His name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. His ancestors had been taken from Jerusalem with the exile and carried off with King Jehoiachin of Judah by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon into exile. Mordecai had raised his cousin Hadassah, otherwise known as Esther, since she had no father or mother. The girl had a good figure and a beautiful face. After her parents died, Mordecai had adopted her. When the king's order had been publicly posted, many young girls were brought to the palace complex of Susa and given over to Haggai, who was overseer of the women. Esther was among them. Haggai liked Esther and took special interest in her. Right off, he started her beauty treatments, ordered special food, assigned her 7 personal maids from the palace, and put her and her maids in the best rooms in the harem. Esther didn't say anything about her family and racial background because Mordecai had told her not to. Every day Mordecai strolled beside the court of the harem to find out how Esther was and get news of what she was doing. Each girl's turn came to go in to King Xerxes after she had completed the 12 months of prescribed beauty treatments. 6 months treatment with oil of myrrh, followed by 6 months with perfumes and various cosmetics. When it was time for the girls to go to the king, she was given whatever she wanted to take with her when she left the harem for the king's quarters. She would go there in the evening. In the morning, she would return to a second harem overseen by Shashgaz, the king's eunuch in charge of the concubines. She never again went back to the king unless the king took a special liking to her and asked for her by name. When it was Esther's turn to go to the king, Esther, the daughter of Abihal, the uncle of Mordecai, who had adopted her as his daughter, she asked for nothing other than what Haggai, the king's eunuch in charge of the harem, had recommended. Esther, just as she was, won the admiration of everyone who saw her. She was taken to King Xerxes in the royal palace in the 12th month, the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of the king's reign. The king fell in love with Esther far more than with any of his other women or any of the other virgins. He was totally smitten with her. He placed a royal crown on her head and made her queen in place of Vashti. Then the king gave a great banquet for all his nobles and officials. Esther's banquet. He proclaimed a holiday for all the providences and handed out gifts with royal generosity. On one of the occasions when the virgins were being gathered together, Mordecai was sitting at the gates. All this time, Esther had kept her family background and race a secret as Mordecai had ordered. Esther still did what Mordecai told her, just as when she was being raised by him. On this day, with Mordecai sitting at the king's gate, Bigthana and Tersesh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the entrance, had it in for the king and were making plans to kill King Xerxes. But Mordecai learned of the plot and told Queen Esther, who then told King Xerxes, giving credit to Mordecai. When the thing was investigated and confirmed as true, the two men were hung on gallows. This was all written down in a logbook kept for the king's use. Some time later, King Xerxes promoted Haman, son of Hammedatha, an Agagite, making him the highest ranking official in the government. All the king's servants at the king's gate used to honor him by bowing down and kneeling before Haman. That's what the king had commanded. Except Mordecai. Mordecai wouldn't do it, wouldn't bow down and kneel. The king's servant at the king's gate asked Mordecai about it. Why do you cross the king's command? Day after day, they spoke to him about this, but he wouldn't listen. So they went to Haman to see whether something shouldn't be done about it. Mordecai had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw for himself that Mordecai didn't bow down and kneel before him, he was outraged. Meanwhile, having learned that Mordecai was a Jew, Haman hated to waste his fury on just one Jew. He looked for a way to eliminate not just Mordecai, but all Jews throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. In the first month, the month of Nisan, of the 12th year of Xerxes, the pur, that is, the lot, was cast under Haman's charge to determine the propitious day and month. The lot turned up in the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Haman then spoke to King Xerxes. There is an odd set of people scattered throughout the provinces of your kingdom who don't fit in. Their customs and ways are different from those of everybody else. Worse, they disregard the king's laws. They're an affront. The king shouldn't put up with them. If it pleases the king, let orders be given that they be destroyed. I'll pay for it myself. I'll deposit 375 tons of silver in the royal bank to finance the operation. The king slipped his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, arch enemy of the Jews. Go ahead, the king said to Haman. It's your money. Do whatever you want with those people. The king's secretaries were brought in on the 13th day of the first month. The orders were written out word for word as Haman had addressed them to the king's satraps, the governors of every province, and the officials of every people. They were written in the script of each province and the language of each people in the name of King Xerxes, and sealed with the royal signet ring. Bulletins were sent out by couriers to all the king's provinces with orders to massacre, kill, and eliminate all the Jews, youngsters and old men, women, and babies, on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month Adar and to plunder their goods. Copies of the bulletin were to be posted in each province, publicly available to all people to get them ready for that day. At the king's command, the couriers took off. The order was also posted in the palace complex of Susa. The king and Haman sat back and had a drink while the city of Susa reeled from the news. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 17 through verse 34. Regarding this next item, I'm not at all pleased. I'm getting the picture that when you met together, it brings out the worst instead of your best. First, I get this report on your divisiveness, competing and criticizing each other. I'm reluctant to believe it, but there it is. The best that can be said for it is that testing process will bring truth into the open and confirm it. And then I find that you bring your divisions to worship. You come together, and instead of eating the Lord's Supper, you bring in a lot of food from the outside and make pigs of yourself. Some are left out and go home hungry. Others have to be carried out, too drunk to walk. I can't believe it. Don't you have your own homes to eat and drink in? Why would you stoop to desecrating God's church? Why would you actually shame God's poor? I never would have believed you would stoop to this, and I'm not going to stand by and say nothing. Let me go over with you again exactly what goes on in the Lord's Supper and why it is so centrally important. I received my instructions from the Master himself and passed them on to you. The Master, Jesus, on the night of his betrayal, took bread. Having given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, broken for you. Do this in remember me." After supper, he did the same thing with the cup. "This cup is my blood, my new covenant with you. Each time you drink this cup, remember me." What you must solemnly realize is that every time you eat this bread and every time you drink this cup, you reenact in your words and actions the death of the Master. You will be drawn back to this meal again and again until the Master returns. You must never let familiarity breed contempt. Anyone who eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Master irreverently is like part of the crowd that jeered and spit on him at death. Is that the kind of remembrance you want to be a part of? Examine your motives, test your heart, come to this meal in holy awe. If you give no thought, or worse, don't care, about the broken body of the Master when you eat and drink, you're running the risk of serious consequences. That's why so many of you, even now, are listless and sick, and others have gone to an early grave. If we get this straight now, we won't have to be straightened out later on. Better to be confronted by the Master now than to face a fiery confrontation later. So, my friends, when you come together to the Lord's table, be reverent and courteous with one another. If you're so hungry that you can't wait to be served, go home and get a sandwich. But by no means risk turning this meal into an eating and drinking binge or a family squabble. It is a spiritual meal, a love fest. The other things you asked about, I'll respond to in person when I make my next visit. Psalm chapter 35, verse 17 through verse 28. God, how long are you going to stand there doing nothing? Save me from their brutalities. Everything I've got is being thrown to the lions. I will give you full credit when everyone gathers for worship. When the people turn out in force, I will say my hallelujahs. Don't let these liars, my enemies, have a party at my expense. Those who hate me for no reason, winking and rolling their eyes, no good is going to come from that crowd. They spend all their time cooking up gossip against those who mind their own business. They open their mouths in ugly grins, mocking, ha ha ha, thought you'd get away with it. We've caught you hands down. Don't you see what they're doing, God? You're not going to let them get by with it, are you? Not going to walk off doing something, aren't you? Please get up. Wake up. Tend to my case. My God, my Lord, my life is on the line. Do what you think is right, God, my God, but don't make me pay for their good time. Don't let them say to themselves, ha ha, we got what we wanted. Don't let them say, we've chewed him up and spit him out. Let those who are being hilarious at my expense be made to look ridiculous. Make them wear donkey ears, pen them with a donkey's tail, who made themselves so high and mighty. But those who want the best for me, let them have the last word, a glad shout, and say over and over and over, God is great. Everything works together for good for his servant. I'll tell you, the world, how great and good you are. I'll shout hallelujah all day, every day. Proverbs chapter 21, verse 19 through verse 20. Better to live in a tent in the wild than with a cross and petulant spouse. Valuables are safe in a wise person's home. Fools put it all out for yard sales. This was the daily reading for August 18.